Welcome to African Tea Time. My name is Abigail. I am, for those who've not met me, I am the graduate assistant at the African Studies Center. I've been running African Tea Time for the past, since last semester, actually. And this is my last semester running African Tea Time. So if we haven't met, nice to meet you. So today we're going to be talking about the African-China relationship and sort of addressing the root causes of coups in West Africa. So this, as if you had time to sort of read the abstract, they were talking about this being a threat to democracy. And so what is the solution? What is the solution to these coups that we are seeing in West Africa? Are they good? Are they bad? Look at the example of the president, or I don't know if I should call him president, but the military leader for Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traore, and a lot of people seem to like him. He seems to be doing what is good for Africa right now. Sort of putting Africa first, if I can put it like that. What is the role that China is playing in sort of trying to fix these what our speakers are terming as a threat to democracy, right? So we're going to be delving into that. Today we have two speakers. We're going to have Dr. Arhin first, and then we're going to be followed by the other speaker. And then at the end, we're going to have questions, all right? So if you have questions, you can send them to me. You can ask them at the end, or you can sort of leave them in the chat, all right? So Dr. Arhin, if you're ready, please go ahead.
Right. Thank you so much, Abby. It's always good to be part of the African Tea Time, especially our annual presentation on Africa, China, where we give the MSU community a rundown of how the Africa-China cooperation looks like. And for this year, we are going to be looking more into the Africa-China security arrangements between Africa and China. And I'm so grateful to Dr. Prah, who would take us through a very important aspect of security on the continent, which has to do with the era of coup d'etats that the continent, especially West Africa, has experienced over the past few years. But we are talking about Africa's security. And so I will be giving the background as to why China. Why are we even bringing China into this conversation? So my brief presentation will look at the security cooperation that exists between Africa and China. And then I would use 3 countries as a case study to see how Africans are actually engaging with China with regards to their security cooperation. Then we can now narrow it down to West Africa specifically, and look at not just West Africa, I think, and just look at the coup d'etat aspects of Africa's security, which Dr. Prah will do. So if you would indulge me for the next few minutes. So fundamentally, there's been an increased appetite for China when it comes to being proactive with security diplomacy. You would find that for a while, China has been very uncomfortable with getting involved in Africa's security arrangement, if I may say. Why do I say this? So for the first time in 2018, if you did a content analysis of the Forum for China-Africa Cooperation, FOCAC, action plan, you will see that China had avoided the word defense. So anything that had to do with militarization, China avoided, like defense. And it first made its appearance in 2018. So we see defense first mentioned in 2018. Now, from there in 2022, we saw China officially present itself to be part of the peace processes in the Horn of Africa. This was the first of its kind, and it actually became topical because people couldn't imagine China, coming out to even be part of some sort of military or security arrangement on the continent. And then from there in 2024, we saw China, actually 2022 again, we saw China officially announce the Global Security Initiative, saying that it was going to present itself again, once again, this time at the global stage to sort of help shape the world's security initiative. So China basically is saying that we are now going to be a part of, or we are going to be more vocal and visible in terms of shaping how the global security is looked at. And then in 2024, we see President Xi officially inviting their counterparts in Africa to join China in the Global Security Initiative. And this announcement was done at the 2024 Forum for China-Africa Cooperation. And so based on these facts, one can comfortably say that China is increasingly expanding its security influence in Africa. So let's look at this. What happened in 2024 at the FOCAC? So for those who do not know, the Forum for China-Africa Cooperation is the biggest forum between China and Africa, where there's rotation between heads of states in Africa and China come together to discuss a 3-year plan for the parties to implement. And so FOCAC has actually shaped what Africa-China cooperation looks like. And so we'll be referring to FOCAC a lot. So this, in the last FOCAC, which was in 2024, China committed 1 billion yuan in non-reimbursable military assistance to Africa, and this in US dollar terms is $140 million. And again, because the Forum for China-Africa Cooperation happens every 3 years, this amount is supposed to be used for the next 3 years. In addition to that, China promised training grounds for Africa's military, that is 6,000 military personnel and then 1,000 police personnel, as well as joint exercises for both Africa and China. So I said earlier on that we are going to look at 3 countries as case study to see how Africans have leveraged the security cooperation with China. And so I'll start with Ghana. What is the case in Ghana? First of all, China and Ghana have enjoyed contemporary diplomatic relations since the 1960s, after Ghana became a republic. Now, compared to most countries in West Africa, you will find that Ghana actually has a wider and a deeper range of engagements with China. So I list major things that have happened, or major sort of infrastructure or major agreements or achievements between Africa or between Ghana and China in their security cooperation. So as I list here, in 2008, China actually constructed Ghana's Ministry of Defense, which is currently one of the nicest ministries building that you see in the country. China also donated in 2016 National Center of Interpol, donated machines to the National Center of Interpol in Ghana. And then also donated 4 patrol boats and 100 military vehicles to the Ghana Armed Forces. In addition to this, we saw China also donating 7.5 million for an armed forces training school and an army headquarters, which has been built in Ghana. Then the point I raise, or my argument, is that China and Ghana since then have initiated or have reassured themselves of further strengthening their security cooperation. And these facts are going to sort of buttress my points. So, for example, before the 2024 FOCAC security cooperation announcements were done in Beijing, you will see that Ghana was already enjoying the implementation of some of China's FOCAC security cooperation commitments. For example, the assurances had already started coming from both countries. The Chinese side paid courtesy calls on their Ghanaian counterparts. The Ministry of Interior, the Minister of Defense received the Chinese envoy. Also in May 2024, that is few months before FOCAC, the Minister of Interior of Ghana received the Chinese ambassador again, and the talks was all around strengthening their security cooperation. Now, when the ambassador, Tong Defa, was in Ghana, he announced that as part of the FOCAC arrangements, they would want, again, for China, Ghana and Africa to sort of entrench their position when it comes to their security ties or cooperation. Now, the announcement, whilst it was being done, they were actually commissioning a new recruit training school at the battle training camp in Bundasi. Now, this training camp is more or less like a tri-service recruitment training school for all the security agencies in the country. Now, right after we saw the construction and actually the handing over of more training schools, such as the Army Recruit Training School in Shai Hills, the Air Force Recruit Training School in Takrady, and the Naval Training School, which form part of the Tri-Service Recruit Training Schools that was launched. Now, we look at what is happening in Nigeria. And then I make the argument that China-Nigeria security cooperation in the context of FOCAC is important, especially for West Africa, because of how influential and the strategic position of Nigeria and what the effects of the spillovers of the insecurity in Nigeria would do to the sub-region should the security situation not be curtailed. Now, notable benefits that Nigeria has received from China. And as I list these things, I would want the audience to sort of juxtapose how these countries are leveraging their security cooperation. So firstly, you see that $1 million grant for military facility upgrade was given to Nigeria in 2008. Also, Nigeria received 15 million in aid from China to fight domestic security challenges. This was after the 2015 FOCAC. And I keep referencing FOCAC so that you see how some of these commitments happen right after the Forum for China-Africa Cooperation. Also, we see supply of sophisticated F-7s, supersonic jet fighters in 2015 to the Nigerian government. And this was at the height of the Boko Haram insurgency in northern Nigeria. Now, this point is important because at the time, other countries, even though Nigeria insisted that it needed some of this fighter jets to ward off the insurgents, most countries who had the capacity or which had the capacity to support were hesitant, but China decided to do, which for Nigeria is a huge step in their security cooperation. Also, we saw the donation of offshore patrol vehicles to the Navy in 2016, and that pre-FOCAC arrangements, most of these military equipment that Nigeria received, Nigeria spent millions of dollars buying them from China. So this came as a relief to Nigeria. Now, looking into the future, Nigeria and China have pledged, again, like in the case of Ghana, to deepen their security cooperation. Now, during the Chinese foreign minister's visit to Nigeria in January this year, he and his Nigerian counterpart reiterated this commitment to achieve long-term stability through development. Again, I keep mentioning this diplomatic engagement between the Chinese side and the African side because it's very important, and it's for those who are interested in geopolitics. For example, you will see that the foreign minister of China, Wang, always visits Africa first. His first international visit every year is to Africa, which is important to Africa-China relations. And then we look at the two countries also planning their military training efforts, and China pledging to support Nigeria's local arms production to address procurement and bottleneck issues in procuring arms internationally. This is also a key achievement for Nigeria, because Nigeria, in all its issues with the rest of the world, and I mean diplomatic issues, it has struggled in securing arms in terms of its efforts to deal with the insurgency in the country. Now, some of the things that Nigeria is doing differently from China, from Ghana at least, is that if you look at the case of Nigeria, you will find that civil society organizations, think tanks, and research centers have been more proactive in examining the country's security cooperation with China. If I may actually go back. So you will see that, for instance, China got, Nigeria actually got funding from China during its engagement with post engagements with China during FOCAC, which other African countries did not do or take advantage of, and so which I think is in the slides that you will see. Also, you see that Nigeria appears to be more involved and instrumental in determining what it wants from its security cooperation with China, unlike Ghana, I would argue. Thirdly, and I think that this position, or Nigerians' agency in their security cooperation with China, can largely be attributed to the security challenges that the country faces. So Nigeria is sure of its security needs because it's currently facing some security challenges, unlike Ghana, where there aren't any serious security issues that Ghana is dealing with. Now, I also argue that, and in buttressing the third point, that this has informed Nigeria's bilateral engagement with China during FOCAC summit. This was the point I was referring to, that in 2018, a side meeting that China had with Nigeria led to a 50 million yuan promise to Nigeria by President Xi. Now, if you look at South Africa, and this is a very interesting case, South Africa is definitely a key player on the continent and has been instrumental in shaping or championing Africa's relations with multilateral institutions like the BRICS, where China is a major player. Now, China-South Africa relations have therefore a different dimension compared to other countries. South Africa's contemporary diplomatic ties with China is fairly new because, again, unlike most African countries, South Africa gained its independence very, very late. But you see that their relationship started officially with the Pretoria Declaration in 2000. Again, 2 years after they had established diplomatic relations. That was 1998. And then from there, they elevated it to a comprehensive strategic partnership in 2010 in Beijing, which was then followed by the Beijing Declaration, which underpinned a 10-year strategic program of cooperation. And I want the audience to once again compare how South Africa is dealing or engaging China compared to Nigeria and Ghana. So for South Africa, you see that there's an intentional long-term planning, and it starts with the two coming together to sort of agree even before the cooperation starts, unlike the two examples that we have seen. So the two countries have since sought to expand their military and security cooperation. South Africa and China have engaged in joint military training exercises as well as military exchanges. Also in 2023, they agreed to collaborate on strategic communication, mechanism building, and address common security challenges. Let me say that South Africa has focused more on its economic relations with China compared to security cooperation. To buttress this point, you will see that during the FOCAC, the delegation South Africa sent to the 2024 FOCAC summit didn't have the Ministry of Defense and military veterans as part of the delegation, but most African countries had all of that. So that tells, where South Africa's interest lies. Now, I argue that should South Africa seek to leverage the commitments made by China in the 2025 FOCAC, the country is likely to focus on the construction of multilateral security cooperation mechanisms. That is, again, as a leader in Africa's multilateral cooperation, South Africa is more likely to look at it from that perspective rather than looking at bilateral cooperations with China. I do not see that happening. So, in fact, South Africa is likely to champion this cooperation on the continent, given its leading role or leadership role at the BRICS. So I reiterate the fact that South Africa has been more proactive and has been strategic in its security cooperation with China. Now, to conclude, I opine that Africa-China security cooperation under FOCAC has seen very remarkable progress. Now, African countries, though in varying degrees, as you can see in the three examples, appear to have benefited from and seek to deepen their security cooperation with China. Now, this position has been mainly informed by the sense of shared interest and investment. Again, China's position is that they do not intend to come in to support African countries in the time of conflict, but that we have to do that in the time of development, right? So China's security strategy is that if we put in the right mechanisms and develop these countries, then we solve their security challenges. And this narrative has resonated well with Africa. So China's security cooperation principle of achieving security through development seems to have resonated with Africa. Now, my final conclusion slide. I argue that China has, however, taken the lead in shaping and championing these security engagements for the most part. So the outlier here will be South Africa. Apart from South Africa, if you look at the security cooperation that has existed between China and other African countries, China has mainly taken the lead in shaping what those corporations should look like or what they have looked like. So, for example, the Global Security Initiative was announced in 2022, but we didn't see the African side taking initiatives or exhibiting agency in actually wanting to be a part of it. But it took President Xi in 2024 at the FOCAC to actually officially invite Africa to be part of the Global Security Initiative, even though some African countries were already sort of enjoying or benefiting from the GSI initiative. So, in essence, China introduced these commitments organically, almost as though these commitments are naturally birthed from their existing relations on the continent. Now, I give an example, and I conclude with this example, that in Ghana's case, 2 months after announcing China's commitment to a few months after, they had already finished building. Of course, that means that those projects were ongoing before even announcements were done. So you see that China in the background was already whipping or engaging their African counterparts. And so when they met at FOCAC, it wasn't new, or that it wasn't a new proposal, but something they had already drawn their African counterparts into. Now, on this note, I would hand over to my good colleague, Dr. Prah, to walk us through why the era of coup in Africa and why China could have a role to play in this regard. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Arhin. All right. So I'm just going to sort of drop a question in there before we move into Dr. Prah. So, I mean, China is definitely sort of this economic powerhouse, right? But I mean, I don't know if China is sort of the best guys to lecture us about security, you know, when you think of it, because China is also not the most democratic country in the world. You know, President Xi Jinping, you know, he's been termed as a dictator, right? So why are we having somebody like him sort of telling us about security in Africa? That's sort of, and you know, when you think of China, you cannot think of China without thinking of Russia, you know, because you've seen South Africa causing up with Russia, you've seen even the West, you know, the countries that are experiencing coups, you're seeing them causing up with, you know, China and Russia, you know, the guys who are, you know, attacking other countries, that kind of a thing, you know, not the most democratic leaders. So why are we causing up to those people? And you know, the problem we're trying to solve here is this attack on democracy, that they don't even exude that democracy we're talking about. Yeah. So maybe you can answer that, and then Dr.
So okay, that's a very interesting question. And as you obviously can see, I was smiling throughout your question because that is a question that Africa-China security folks like Dr. Prah, myself have engaged in extensively. And again, but to answer your question, it's about the question of whose narrative. Once again, whose narrative, right? And when you started this session, you talked about what is happening in Burkina Faso, right? And so now, not just in Burkina Faso, but a lot of African countries are questioning whether or not democracies are actually working for them. You know, if you were at the inaugural ceremony of the new president in Ghana.
Yeah.
We had several heads of states come into the country, but when the Burkinabe guy came, you saw the uproar, right? We got a lot of people actually on their toes because they started thinking whether or not democracy was losing grounds on the continent. All that coup d'etats or military takeover was becoming again to Africa. And with our history of destabilization with military takeovers and coup d'etats, for anyone, of course, who is into security, you'll be worried. But whether we like it or not, if I may say, China, Russia, and the rest of the world, with the existence of new multilateral institutions like the BRICS, is really reimagining and reshaping the narrative, you know. And again, let's look at what is happening in the US currently, right, with the current president. You know, most African countries or leaders, if you ask them, they will tell you that they know for sure that now they can be more certain China or even Russia than the US.
Yeah.
You know, typical example, a few years ago, African countries were being told that they were not going to get certain aid if they wouldn't respect the rights of homosexuals or the LGBT community. And so where do they stand now, right? So if these countries had made policies surrounding this issue, today they would be in a dilemma, right? So African countries are now beginning to find some sort of stability. Ironically, with these countries you talk about compared to to the US. And let me just add one more argument, then I think I would close curtains on this question.
Yeah.
China has argued, and most African countries have argued, that we have not seen, even though, of course, China is called, he's called a dictator and all of that. How many times have we seen China interfering in other countries' security, or or being part of the wars, if I may, right? Or being actively involved in wars in other countries, right? So if you say you are promoting democracy, how is it that you are in Afghanistan? How is it that the position has changed from Russia, Ukraine to the Palestinian-Israeli war, right? So the principle changed, from protecting safeguarding the sovereignty of countries like Ukraine against Russia. And then when it comes to Palestine, Israel, now we don't know America's position, or America is, we can't tell exactly where America stands, right? So these are the narratives out there. And that is why some of these issues we are talking about, which I think Dr. Prah will get into, are becoming more interesting, right? Because the dynamics are changing. And the US is now withdrawing, if I may, from the global scene. And so China is seen to be stepping up together with Russia and countries in the Middle East.
Okay.
I don't know if that helps to sort of address your question.
Yeah, definitely. As Peter said in the chat, that's very interesting observation. All right, so I'm gonna move to Dr. Prah, and then we're gonna have questions at the end. I think you should be able to share your screen, Dr. Prah.
Okay, Abby, I will not be using the screen. I will not be sharing screen.
Okay, there you go. All right.
So, and also I would want to say something little on the question you asked my colleague. Yes, I think it's African leaders are now closing to China for also other reasons. For instance, China does not, as we know, does not interfere in the domestic politics of other countries. So China doesn't care whether you are killing yourselves, whatever is happening, as long as the benefits, they get what they want, they also get what you want. And African leaders tend to like this mode of engagement than the Western style, where you'll be told what to do. You have to put in the democratic principles and all this. So I think African leaders tend to like this kind of Chinese approach, where they also feel they're in control of their affairs without being dictated to. Okay. And also, another reason why Africa is also tilting towards China is that China has a lot of economic and strategic interest in Africa that it needs to protect. So African countries are unable to leverage on China's interest for more economic and security benefits. So as a rational human being, I say Africans are doing what I believe any other country would do, in the position of wanting goodies from a major power like China. Yes, so it's something I wanted to add to it.
All right. Thank you very much for sort of getting your input in there. So I think you can sort of proceed, and then we will have questions. All right?
Okay.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. Good morning from Hong Kong. My name is Kwesi, Wolseley Prah. So I want to give a brief overview of the current coup d'etats in West Africa, and then I'll come to China's role, if there's any, in this coups. Okay, so I'll begin by saying that coup d'etats in Africa or in West Africa is not a new phenomenon. Okay, it's not a new phenomenon in the sense that since the 1950s to 2000, there were over close to 200 coup d'etats across the continent. And West Africa had a very large share of these coup d'etats. However, from 2000 through to 2010, there was a little bit of stability in terms of coups and also some relative progress in democratic process in West Africa. However, the coup d'etats in Mali in May and August 2001, in Guinea in September 2021, and Burkina Faso in January and September 2020, and Niger in July 2023, marks a shift in the relative peace or stability the continent was beginning to enjoy from coup d'etats. So first, I just want to establish that the coups are not new. It follows a long historical trend. However, these coups, which I'll call latter-day coups, okay, has fundamentally exposed the role of ECOWAS as the arbiter of peace, and security in West Africa, because ECOWAS has failed to ensure a return to democratic rule or to civilian rulership by even one of these countries. ECOWAS has not been able to compel or to ensure that these countries return to democratic rule. Rather, it has helped to deepen or entrenched the positions of these military juntas. Okay, and I think one of the major things we need to talk about is ECOWAS' initial exposure and its toying of the prospect of using military force against these coup leaders led to these coup leaders forming an alliance, which we currently know as Alliance of Sahel States. And this alliance promised collective security, where if any of these three countries is attacked by ECOWAS, the other two countries will have to support the other country. And we should be very mindful of the fact that the securities or the militaries of these three countries are battle hardened. They have experience in warfare in terms of insurgency and terrorism, and were very instrumental in the G5 Sahel force. So these militaries, whilst on the global level might be termed as weak, but domestically within the sub-region in West Africa, they were formidable armies. And I think the posture of ECOWAS initially as imposing sanctions on these countries, which later is removed, and the condemnation also led to these countries, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, leveraging on global dynamics to entrench their position. So a shift from the West, France, and the United States to Russia and China, which I'll come back to in the case of China. I'll come back to later, and also the position of ECOWAS or the failure or the inability of ECOWAS to bring these countries to a negotiation table also led to these countries finally leaving ECOWAS, and this means that they are now immune from accountability from ECOWAS. So collectively, ECOWAS has failed to promote peace and security in the sub-region, and more so to ensure a return of democratic rule in these three countries, which is very problematic going into the future. Please, can you hear me? Please, can you hear me?
Yes, loud
Hello?
and clear. Yeah, we
Okay,
can hear you.
very well. Very well. Okay, so whilst coups in Africa or in West Africa is not a new phenomenon, however, these current coup d'etats exhibit some differences, exhibit some similar or some differences from coups Africa is used to, especially during the Cold War. And I'll give some examples to buttress this. Okay, in the Cold War, coup d'etats in West Africa largely did not receive mass public support. Coup leaders mostly enjoyed support from within their tribe or ethnic groups. However, they failed to mobilize mass support, and they rather received large-scale condemnation from citizens. However, these current coup d'etats are different. These leaders are enjoying mass support from their citizens, especially even with the youth who feel frustrated with the incumbents. So the popularity this current crop of coup leaders are enjoying in Africa is unique. And it's not something that has previously been experienced in West Africa. Yeah. And also their popular support is not only just limited to their countries. And my colleague mentioned the case of Ibrahim Traore when he came to Ghana on 7th January this year for the inauguration of Ghana's President John Mahama. The applause he received from both Ghanaians and Burkinabes in Ghana speaks to the fact that indeed he enjoys mass support not just in Burkina Faso, but also around its neighbors. Okay. Also, the coups in this current dispensation has also taken advantage of technology, which previous era did not have the privilege or the opportunity to use. And by technology, I mean social media and other digital platforms. So in Chad, in Burkina Faso, Mali, in Guinea, and in Niger, these coup leaders have taken advantage of social media to, as it were, sell themselves to the public. And by this, they've been able to gain mass support and sympathy from around the continent. Okay, and they've also been able to use social media and digital platforms to disseminate information on their justification for why they engage in the coups. And people now sympathize with these leaders and also support their actions. And as I will come to the reasons for the coup, you'll get to understand why there are justifications for the coup. So social media and digital platforms are playing an important role in the entrenchment of these coup leaders. And especially in Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traore uses social media to show the developmental projects he is bringing across. And also, all these leaders are also drawing on the spirit of Thomas Sankara, who they see as a role model. Thomas Sankara was a military leader in Burkina Faso who was assassinated. And during his time, he rolled out a lot of social intervention programs and also massive agricultural development in Burkina Faso. So he serves as an epitome of governance for these military leaders. Also, the current regional dynamics faced in the Sahel is different from anything that the sub-region has ever faced. Okay, so during the Cold War, coup leaders in West Africa largely faced insurgents or opposition to their rule, to their military rule. However, in the current dispensation, these military juntas are not only facing insurgents, but more so jihadist extremism or terrorism. So now there's a very thin line between who is an insurgent and who is a terrorist in West Africa. So these coup leaders are now faced with more major security threats than their predecessors in the sub-region. Also, another thing that distinguishes these current military coups from the previous ones we've experienced, the justification narrative. And currently, these coup leaders are able to present their actions as necessary corrections to failed democratic systems, rather than outright power grabs. Formerly in West Africa and across the continent, coups were seen as power grabs. However, in the case of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, also in Chad, and also in Guinea, these leaders as maybe I will explain as they've been able to justify their actions and provided themselves military rulership as an alternative to failed democracies in the sub-region. So these are some dynamics that I would say make these coups a bit different from the coups we have experienced in the past. And also, speaking about the causes of coups in Africa, or in West Africa specifically, we are all very familiar with one major factor, economic hardship. And Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger particularly are among the poorest countries, not just in Africa, but globally. And over the years, the governments have failed to roll out economic programs and incentives to help alleviate their citizens from the economic struggles, especially the youth. And I must say, this is one of the major causes of the immigration crisis Africa is facing, where the youth in the Sahel risk their lives to cross the Mediterranean to Europe to seek greener pastures. So there's a strong mistrust against the governments of these countries. So the military leaders leverage on these economic hardships to stay the course. And this is also a reason why they enjoy popular support among their citizens and even within the West African sub-region. Also, another major issue for the current coups in West Africa is also the governance deficit. Okay, in these West African countries, and I must be frank, they are not just limited to these coup-affected countries. It's across Africa.